It provides a cultural opportunity for students as well as the community to explore the rich heritage of St. Bernard and the New Orleans area.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Mr. Curtis Manning.
Greetings and welcome to the second lecture of the 2004-2005 season. Not only does this promise to be an exciting and interesting lecture, of course other parts are going to be more important than the lecture, maybe it sounds like, but we'll get there. But it's going to be a great lecture, not only for the entertainment value, because it'll be very interesting, but also it'll be one of those lectures that I think scholars will refer to, historians will refer to in 10 years or 50 years as some of the primary historical material. And so it should be great. Before we get to the important stuff, a few housekeeping details. As many of you might know, the last lecture that we had, the history of Old Araby, was very popular, and unfortunately Hurricane Ivan messed with the plans a little bit. Due to popular demand, the plan is to have a re-lecture, a redo of it, without all the hoopla, but just without the reception and things like that, but the lecture itself, on November 15th, which is a Monday. All right, so there's still a few things to check with, but pencil that in on your calendar, November 15th, and Chris Fatcher has agreed to do it again, so I think it'll be a good thing. All right, so the second thing is, on the email list, there were a few email difficulties, and so if ever you expect to get an email newsletter from me and don't, always know that you can get it at www.historylectureseries.com and download it from there, because if I don't send it to you, probably something happened, so we'll work to get those corrected. Finally, as we mentioned last time as well, we started doing DVDs of the lecture that are playing on both the educational channel and the government channel. The last time it came out pretty well, and so we're working on the distribution of it. What we'll do is, in the next week or two, once we get this next one, we'll start putting a few copies in the Nunez library to be checked out, as well as in some of the other libraries around the community. In the meantime, though, I have several copies in my office. We'll be happy to lend you as many as you like, for as long as you like. Unfortunately, they cost us $7, and so if you would like to buy one, we'd be happy to give it to you for our cost. Otherwise, we're welcome to lend them you as long as possible, and you can make copies or anything that you like. So we'll get that, all right? If I can get you to look to your program, and on the back is a calendar of all the upcoming lectures. We're going to have, after an introduction by Ron Chapman, we'll have a panel discussion, so it should be good. Then at 8 o'clock, I'm proud to announce that we now have a sponsor for the door prizes. We're moving up in the world, and I'd like to thank the Araby Diner. So the door prizes will be 2 dinners for 2 to the Araby Diner. So we'd like to thank our community sponsor, the Araby Diner, for that. Let's have a hand. And then after that, we'll have an informal question and answer period. So you'll have time to interact with our speakers. All right. So without any more news in, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Ron Chapman, who'll give the historical overview of tonight's topic, the history of local government. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's get on, because I only have 10 minutes. I've been informed, so I've got to get through this rather quickly. Okay, Louisiana is unique. Other states in Louisiana divided into parishes. Other states have counties. If you remember, if you ever ordered anything online or anywhere else, and you put down parish instead of county, you think that you're ordering something for a religious organization as such. We're very unique in that regard. Other states have other forms of government, whereas Louisiana has police juries, which is another unique form of government, and 48 of the forms of the parishes in Louisiana are still under a police jury form of government. A lot of that's because of our Catholic traditions. Most other states of the Union are Protestant, and that has a lot to do with this. Origins of the system. Beginning in 1762, Louisiana was divided into 21 ecclesiastical parishes, which is a reflection of the Catholic dominance of France and later Spain. That's taken from the police jury organization website. I tend to disagree a bit, though, because it was in 1762, the French were getting rid of Louisiana, so there was no reason to go to any extensive efforts to change what was going on, the structure of government. However, in 1769, if you look into the records, Governor O'Reilly, Bloody O'Reilly, after putting down the so-called French Revolution here in New Orleans, tore down what was the Superior Council, established a cabildo, and established 21 districts. So I'm inclined to believe the 1769 date is perhaps the most accurate. These subdivisions would remain until 1804, which is 1 year after the Louisiana Purchase. It was at that time that the Legislative Council decided, in their infinite wisdom, that the parish system was obsolete. They wanted to come up with counties so everybody would be the same. They established 12 counties on April 10th in 1805. A lot of people aren't aware of the fact that we actually had counties in Louisiana. This is a fascinating map here. What you have here are the 12 counties. And if you notice, this section here is blackened out. That was still West Florida. So if you're driving along I-12, you'll notice they have these blue signs with a white star on it that says Republic of West Florida. That's because in 1810, this group broke off right from here. They rebelled against the Spanish, and they established their own republic, which lasted for several months. That was the Republic of West Florida. So this hadn't come in yet as to 1805. This darkened area here was the no man's land between Spanish Texas and the American territory. There was some difficulties there, so they decided to establish a no man's land, which became kind of a haven for banditis, so to speak. So as a result, these were the counties as they established them in 1805. It failed. Counties proved just entirely too large, and the French and Spanish were not about to change their way of doing things. So as a result, they redivided it in 1807 into 19 of the original 21 ecclesiastical parishes. This is the term parish was officially introduced into the Constitution as applied to local governments. In 1845, all reference to counties would disappear completely from the Louisiana Constitution. Origins of parish government. In 1807, a council and a House of Representatives to the territory of Orleans. If you remember, after Louisiana Purchase, the whole area of Louisiana was divided. The territory of Orleans is what is now Louisiana. The territory of Louisiana was above that line. Okay. They decided that it would be ruled by a judge. To assist him, they set up a 12-man jury, was appointed to aid him in administering the operations of the parish. They were responsible for, is this extensive or what? Execution of whatever concerns the interior and local police and for administration of the parish. Now that's some wide jurisdiction. In 1810, they established the office of the parish sheriff for each parish, and he was to be subsidized and paid by the police assembly of the parish, which was, in essence, the police jury. In 1811, the act of the police assembly, they made it official by naming it a police jury. So it's at this point here in 1811 that the term police jury officially becomes part of Louisiana lexicon. In 1813, they provided for the establishment of election wards, because at this point it was elective, but it was more or less at large. At this point here, they decided to actually carve each district or each parish into wards, and people were elected to serve from each ward. That's the police jury system that we were familiar with. In 1811, the powers of the judges were reduced on the police jury, so gradually what you're having is a tendency to withdraw from the old way of having it a more or less a quasi-legal system or a judicial system into an administrative system. In 1811, the justices of the peace who had been made part of this operation were now made ex officio members of the police juries. In 1824, justices of the peace were dropped from the police juries. And in 1830, the judges themselves were removed from police juries. So by 1830, you now not only have the police jury in existence, you have them divided by wards, they're elected within their wards, and all the judges and justices of the peace, that judicial aspect has now been stripped away. It is now really a political organization. This establishes St. Bernard Parish, and you can kind of see the layout. Governments compared. Police jury. Police juries can have no fewer than 5 members and no more than 15. That's established by the legislature. Flexibility is often cited as an advantage to the system. If you remember the police jury system, the way it was set up, you called your police jury when you needed anything. If you had a broken sidewalk, you had a problem, sometimes you needed a load of shells or mud, whatever it was a very personal system. You called the police jury and he was able to respond. So you had that flexibility because they could adapt to whatever situation came along. Police jury performs both administrative and legislative functions in the same person. Unlike the United States government, we have a president, a House, and a Senate that sits down and discusses and debates issues, and you have checks and balances. Under the police jury system, all these powers were handled by the individuals on the police jury themselves. There was no separation of powers. There were no checks and balances. More personal contact with voters. In a sense, going back to the ward, if you had a problem, you'd call your police juror. It behooved your police juror to respond immediately to you because you were a voter. The downside to that was, if you were on the outs with your police juror, there was no course of appeal whatsoever. Police jurors had their own work crews. I don't know if you remember that. The employees didn't have any protection. You were hired by the police jury, you were fired by the police jury, you worked at the whim of the police jury, you reported to him in the morning, he gave you a list of things to do that he had accumulated, and he sent you out to do your jobs. Less bureaucracy, that's obvious. It was a simple phone call, would get what you needed. Ward was a primary concern, not a parish focus. The image I always had of the police jury was more or less like the Knights of the Round Table, where each of the police juries themselves, they sat in a group when they met, but each one's primary concern was for his individual ward. They didn't have a parish overview. And those of us who remember in 1987, there was a schism that took place between minority and majority, and 2 of the members who will be on the panel were members of the minority group. They saw what it was like when the majority 6 could take all the resources of the parish and just spend it in their 6 wards, and the other 5 went wanting. The president-council form of government is determined by a vote of the people. When you adopt a home rule charter, you put in that charter the system that you want and the composition that you want. Here in St. Bernard Parish, we decided on a strong president, 2 people at large, 5 councilmen. Total of 7 councilmen and 1 parish president. You'll see in a moment why we did that. Voters elected a greater percentage of officials. Voters have more control, in the sense that under our form of government here in St. Bernard Parish, instead of voting for 1 of 11 police jurors, you now vote for the president, 2 men at large, and your district councilman, which means you vote for basically half of the government. Administrative and legislative functions are divided between 2 branches of government. The funds are determined by the legislative side, which is the parish council. The administration is done by the parish president. You don't have a mingling of the 2. Obviously, they have to cooperate with one another, but the function being you want the separation of powers as a system of checks and balances. One watches the other. Less personal contact with voters, that's obvious, but a greater impartiality in providing services. So it might take you longer to get something done because you have to contact the Public Works Department, and if they don't respond, you go to the Complaints Department. It works its way through, but the fact remains is that if it's needed to be done, if it's legal to do it, if it's, for instance, like something that you want done privately in your property, you may be out of luck, but the reality is if it's something that has to be done, it'll be queued up on a priority basis, and it has nothing to do with your personal relationship with your councilman or with the parish president. More bureaucracy in solving problems, obvious, because you have to go through the process. Greater accountability, because everything is recorded and carefully checked out. Focus on parish-wide concerns, not wards. This is a critical event, because as St. Bernard Parish was growing, it needed this overall perspective. And by establishing the form of government that we have at present, the people who are sitting, the parish president has to look at the entire parish. The 2 councilmen at large are elected by the entire parish. They have to look at the entire parish. So while your 5 district councilmen can focus on the problems in their districts, you do have the overview from the councilmen at large and from the parish president to see that all this is queued up in the general good of the parish. I think we'll get on to the rest of the lecture, if you don't mind. Bring up the house lights. Okay, I would like to introduce now, we have a panel set up here that'll be talking to us. First, I'd like to introduce the parish president, Henry Jr. Rodriguez. He brings a lot to the table. He was a former police juror president, councilman at large, and his current parish president, Mr. Jr. Rodriguez. The next person I need to introduce is Charles Ponstein. He likewise was the former police juror president, councilman at large, and parish president. Next, I'd like to introduce Stephen Estopanol. He's a civil engineer, parish surveyor, and he served as chairman of the Home Rule Charter Commission in 1987 that drafted St. Bernard's Home Rule Charter. And finally, certainly, last but certainly not least, the Honorable David Garberty, who was a police juror himself, district court, and now he's a Court of Appeals, Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals Justice. And I thank you.
Good evening. I guess I've been given the daunting task of trying to keep these three gentlemen separated because I know, because I was a police juror, and I remember the feelings that stirred among the elected police jurors when there was going to be an attempt to change the form of the government. I must say that during the process, I, of course, supported the change. But, you know, history has a way, when you look back at it, that maybe it's not the best form of government. So I'm going to reserve my comments because I know these three people who also experienced it from different perspectives also have a lot to say about their feelings of the old form of the government as well as the new form of government. So I think it's only appropriate if we start with Mr. Rodriguez, the current parish president, to give us some insight as to both the current and the past.
Thank you, Dave. Well, I've certainly been here through both of them, and so has Mr. Ponstein, and I guess it's kind of ironic that your last two presidents are old police jurors. I think in the beginning the idea was that we'd all be gone, we'd all be history, and that just didn't happen. To be totally honest with you, I had mixed feelings in the beginning about it, and I opposed the council form of government for many reasons, and one of them is that you lose control of the things that you're able to do because you're both administrative and legislative. However, it does have its good sides and does have its good points. Mr. Chapman gave you quite a rundown on both sides of it. However, Mr. Chapman does live in a little world out there. So does some of our good government people that put this charter together. It's not exactly as great as what you think it is, and if you think that things can't be manipulated, don't you believe that. Government is only as good as the people that you elect, period. No more, no less. Charlie and I can go back and reflect upon the reason that you have this council form of government today is on account of the 6-5 majority. Had that 6-5 majority not been, people in St. Bernard Parish would not have voted for this council form of government. They had been presented with a council form of government prior to that, and the voters had turned it down. And looking at it today, we're in a council form of government, but there are still a lot of people in St. Bernard that are in old police jury mode. They still want that load of sand, like to have that load of shells, like to have that tree cut. The police jury form of government was real. We were really service oriented, because basically what it amounted to was this: if you didn't do it, you weren't going to get elected. And Mr. Chapman said something particular about if you were in with the police bureau, he took care of you. If you weren't, he didn't. It's still that way today. You don't do for your enemies. You do for your friends. It makes no difference whether it's council form of government or whether it's police bureau. If everybody wants to be honest about the situation, that still happens today. The only thing is, your councilman doesn't have the opportunity to do that. All you did with this form of government was you shifted. Well, I had a hell of a time trying to get that word shifted out of there. I was getting a little worried that day.
You did well.
But I got him, huh?
You did well.
All right. But what you basically did was you shifted the power. I'm still having that trouble. I didn't want to shift it back then. But
You'd like to shift it now, though, right?
what you have? No, not really.
Okay.
What happens is you have people in the administration that's able to do basically what Mr. Chapman said. If for some reason or another you fall in disfavor with someone in administration, you have the same problem getting something done. Or you can get something done a lot quicker. It's not the reality. It's the reality of life, and that's what it's about. You know, it's not the model form of government. There are many problems I see with this form of government. One of the issues that I have a problem with at the present time is, of course, I mean, that we need to critique the situation. There's some things that need to be adjusted in the council form of government. But one of the things that really bothers me more than anything else is the 5 districts. Now, what Mr. Chapman told you, it's good sound logic. But what I see happening, the reality of it is, I would like to see it go back to 11 districts. And my reason for going back to 11 districts is, it would be a lot easier and a lot less costly for a person to run on an individual basis if he was able to run in an area where he could canvass locally and not have to depend on the media. The cost of running an election today for a police bureau, a council form, it's rather ridiculous when you feel that you have to, I think, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 is nothing for a councilman to spend today. That was unheard of in the police jury days. But a lot of them, that I go back to the times when we had 11 districts. You could walk your district. Today, you can walk, but you better have a couple of pair of shoes. And you better have a lot of help. So I kind of feel that what's happened over the years with this council form of government, we've made council form of government for the rich, the little guy, the poor guy that might want to get interested in politics and serve the public. He doesn't have that opportunity because, number one, unless he has $10,000 or $15,000 or maybe more to spend of his own, he's not going to get in the race. If he has to raise it, it's very difficult for a person that's not an incumbent to raise that kind of money. It's kind of difficult for an incumbent to raise that kind of money, to be totally honest with you.
Ms. Ponstein, I'm sorry. I thought you were finished, honey. Mr. Ponstein, why don't you give us an overview of your feelings?
Georgia, you cut me off.
Absolutely.
I'm going to tell these folks a story about you after this is over with.
And I got a few about you, too.
And I guarantee you, we're going to make some of that hair come back on your head.
I had hair when I was a police juror. Remember that.
Yeah, mine was black.
Thank you, Judge. First of all, I want to thank Nunez and also Ron Chapman for getting this forum together, because I think while we're all still alive and can give you a story of what happened in the last 25 years in Seminole Parish government, I think it's very important for you, the public, to know. And as Ron gave you the dates and the facts, I'd like to give you some of the stories that went on to cause this change. I think Judge Garbutt told you he was for the change in the form of government as I was. But out of 11 police jurors, we were the only 2 that were in favor of this move. So in order to get an item like this on the ballot, you need to have 2/3 of the majority of the police jury. And this was almost impossible. In fact, it was impossible until the citizens of St. Bernard got together and started a petition drive to put it on the ballot. But if you don't mind, I'd like to digress a little bit, going back 25 years. I used the date 25 years because when Dave Garbany, at that time he wasn't a judge, talked me into running for police jury at our Friday restaurant, I did not know what I was getting into, and after being a businessman since 1972, this was 1979 when Dave was talking to us about running for police jury. Mr. Rodriguez was in office going on 4 years then. Dave was running against a 20-year-old incumbent. I was running against a 16-year incumbent, and I knew nothing about politics. But the reason I'm bringing this up, one of the reasons why I was in business for 8 years, and when Dave talked to me, it made sense. I've been in business, and I knew I was paying taxes. I didn't see where this money was going. I said, well, I do want to get involved. I'm going to go ahead and run. But I think the most important factor for those who weren't down here in '79, you have to realize that was the first real, I wouldn't say official election, straight election that we had. If you remember, after the election of '76 is when we had problems with people voting more than once, dead people voting, and so 1979 election.
But they didn't complain, Joe.
Some of the candidates did. What had happened was the 1980 to 84 term would be the first term, hopefully, that they would have a true pulse of what the public wanted in St. Bernard Parish for their elected officials. Needless to say, from 1980, they had a big transition in the parish police jury system. Before that, the parish president and the parish manager were one and the same. And this gave that person a lot of powers. And all he needed was 6 votes on that police jury, or 5, counting himself would be 6, to control everything in the parish. We had 11 little fiefdoms during that time, and if you were, not only as an individual on the outs with your police jury, if you were on a police jury and the outs with the majority of the police jury, you couldn't get anything for your ward. And can you imagine trying to divide money 11 ways when you look at from Araby to St. Bernard? Mr. Rodriguez had the biggest district, and he got the same amount of money as Mr. Munster did in his district, which was the smallest district. So Mr. Munster was planting oleanders along the canals, and Mr. Rodriguez was trying to fix drainage problems.
Remember the time I stole these old
Yes. I didn't say that, Mr. Rodriguez. But what I'm saying is that the priorities were different in each ward, and with the police jury system, this is when Dave and I tried to convince the rest of the police jury to look at a different form of government so that people that were elected didn't only look for their district, but looked parish-wide. And I think this is what caused the turmoil. Now, in 1984, when Mr. Rodriguez and I, and Dave had gone on to be a judge at that time, got reelected, they had some wheeling and dealing, I guess you'd call it, going on. And at first, I think Mr. Rodriguez and I were in the majority in 1984, 85, and shortly after, we became in the minority. But it was a 6-5 majority-minority, and I'll bring this up. It was so important in changing this form of government. I think if that wouldn't have happened, that because when people saw what happened to that form of government when 6 people controlled everything and where their voice wasn't heard, this made those people get out with that petition drive and push for the change in form of government. Granted, the present council form of government may not be the best form of government, but I think it's a step in the right direction. I think, as Mr. Rodriguez said, the more bureaucrats that get involved in administration kind of control things more so than the police juries did from the administrative end. The president ends up being, I call him the whipping boy, because the council, anything that happens good in the parish, they take credit for. Anything that happens bad in the parish, the president gets blamed for it, and his administrators. So I do feel that we are moving in the right direction. I do think some changes are needed. I brought this up to the council doing my farewell speech as a president, and some of them thought I was crazy, but I really feel that as other states are moving forward, Louisiana is, because even though we still have a lot of police jury systems, and some of them justifiably so because they're in rural areas, St. Bernard should be a council form of government. I do feel that eventually the president's position ought to be a professional position, like a parish manager, to where it's a person that, just like our department heads have to be certain qualifications. I was in the grocery business. Mr. Rodriguez was a fisherman. We might have been good businessmen, but, there's a lot goes on in government that we as businessmen didn't know, but we had to depend on our subordinates. So I do feel that the president ought to become either appointed by the council to where it's the best qualified person, so that the people working in administration are there not because they're elected, because they're there to do a good job. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you. Mr. Stopenow?
Yes, I would like to thank Community College for putting on this. It's important to get a lot of points of view in a historical context. As any officer that's ever read through after-action reports will tell you, if you got 6 men involved, you'll get 6 different versions of what happened, sometimes completely contradictory versions. That doesn't mean somebody's lying or making things up. It's just that people see things differently based upon their background, the situation they're in, what they bring into the action, and what they take out of it. And the new form of government was definitely a product of the times. And there was a lot more to it besides just the 6-5 majority abuse that was taking place under the police jury. About that same time, St. Bernard Parish was reaching the threshold density of population. We were becoming more urbanized. The parish was transforming from a rural agrarian fisherman society into a more urban setting where you have different kinds of businesses and a more urban type of operation of government. And the police jury system does not lend itself well to that kind of government because of the possibilities of abuses, because the fact that you don't have professional control of a lot of the facilities and operations. It's done by each juror in his ward becomes the expert on whatever it is they have to do. And sometimes you get mixed results from that. And also there was a lot of scandal that was going on at the time. Some police jurors were getting in not only political trouble, but legal trouble. And that aggravated the citizenry. And so when the petition drive went forward, it was well accepted. And because the people felt like there was a need, there's nothing as powerful as an idea whose time has come. And the new form of government was an idea whose time had finally come. The people finally decided that they needed something with a little more professional administration in the government and a little less of the good old boy politics, though you're never going to get rid of the good old boy politics as long as there's human beings involved. So each commissioner, each candidate for the Home Rule Charter Commission, because it was passed by petition, state law says that then the commissioners will be elected and not appointed. This made this commission different than all the previous ones. All the previous ones were appointed by police jurors, and there was a significant police jury influence on what that commission did. Whereas in this case, it was 11 rascals and scoundrels and wild men. Very little police jury influence because most of the people there were not involved in the political establishment. And so as these commission candidates went around to their wards and knocked on doors, just like police jurors did, and talked with the public, they would present their platform. I'm for a strong president form of government. I'm for a weak president form of government. I'm for a council commission form of government. Each candidate would then present that to the people, and then the people voted and elected the commissioners. And as fate would have it, the people that were elected were the ones that supported a strong president form of government, a president council form of government. So it moved very quickly into deciding upon that particular form of government. There was more agreement in the initial meeting of the 11 commissioners than one could imagine because of the influence that the people had. So it was really a commission that was formed by the people, and everyone took their job seriously. There was no one there that was lighthearted about the effort they were going to make. Everybody was serious. So we put together the Home Rule Charter based upon influence from organizations such as PAR and looking at charters for other local governments and looking at some charters that failed and maybe we could ascertain why they failed, or at least surmise why they failed. and we produced a charter that laid out everything that we thought we could get voted on by the 11 people. Remember, we were still 11 people voting on it, so not everything in the charter is something I agreed with. If there's something in the charter that aggravates you, that's what I put in. But if there's something in the charter that really works well, one of the other guys thought that up, you see. But no, it was a product of 11 people. It wasn't a product of one person or one particular idea. And when it was voted on by the people, it was so overwhelmingly approved that if all the people that had not voted had voted and voted against it, it still would have passed. So that's a pretty overwhelming mandate. And we went from that overwhelming mandate to implementation. And as with any transition, it had its rough moments. But now we're, in the third or fourth administration of it? Time flies by. You realize that someone born when this charter was passed will be able to vote this year? Oh, you think about that, that's kind of scary, isn't it? Is that right? Yeah. Yeah. Time flies. Time
Mr.
flies.
Stopino, let me ask you a question.
Yes.
As I said, I was a supporter of the change in the form of government.
Yes, I remember your support.
And I still support it. But my question to you is, what would be wrong with giving the councilmen some executive functions in order to serve their constituencies a little better? As indicated by Mr. Chapman on the summary of the council form of government, responses sometimes are rather lengthy for the citizens.
I would have to say, first of all, I think the response under President Rodriguez has improved quite a bit. And you would have to say then that if we're having poor responses, then it maybe was the administration hadn't worked out all the kinks yet. I mean, it's still a young form of government, and it's been improving. It was tough under Lindeen because he had to break in a whole new set of horses. Charlie had to work through a lot of problems too, but he was getting it better. And now Junior, Mr. Rodriguez, as president, I think has done a fine and admirable job. So I would argue that while it's fine to offer such changes, and there's probably some good ideas out there that I haven't thought of, there's mechanisms to amend the charter to change any aspects of it. But I think what we learned on the commission, studying all the forms of government, that any little camel's nose under the edge of the tent of administrative power by a legislative body, pretty soon the whole camel's in that tent, and you have a president out there that really can't operate unless he can garner some kind of majority all the time for every operation. So there's some dangers involved.
Charlie, what do you think about that, giving some executive powers to the councilman?
Well, I think what Steve was saying has some merit. When you look at the first 4 years, and everybody has a different philosophy, those first 4 years, they had some financial restraints in that. Plus, the philosophy of the first administration was a lot different in my 8 years, and I think Junior. 90% of the time, I'd say, even though Mr. Rodriguez fight, we agree upon projects. And I think what happened is, after the first 4 years, there was some monies available. But if it wouldn't have been for the support of the council and the support of the public to go ahead and our biggest problem that I undertook was trying to replenish what was neglected. And this, we went everywhere from salaries to equipment. We had no computer system when I took over. So I was playing catch up. And it took me, the 8 years, we were just getting to a point where we finally finished our sewer plant. We got the half-cent sales tax supported and passed by the public. Mr. Rodriguez is following through with the water plant. So from an infrastructure standpoint, the parish is much better off. This could have never happened during the police jury days. To answer whether or not they should have more executive powers, I don't think it's needed, because I know, and I'm sure Junior has the same problems I did, some councilmen are more active than others as far as they'll call you when they have a problem from their constituents, and the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So what I'm saying is that even though councilmen don't have, quote, the power, they do have the influence, because they can talk to the president, to the directors, the department heads, and whatever, and get the job done. As far as, I think if you diminish any of the president's powers, then you're getting back to that ward concept as opposed to a parish-wide concept.
Mr. Rodriguez, now that you're on the executive side of it, and I know you were a long time on the legislative side, how do you feel about it?
Well, I do things just a little bit differently. During the first administration, when Mr. Dean took over, being a constable at the time that we just come out of the police jury system, we weren't even allowed to talk to the department heads. It was always Mr. Dean's assumption that, you can't tell my department heads what to do. You can't. Nobody's trying to tell. All we're doing is asking for information. If asking for information is wrong, but we weren't even allowed to do that. So the council at the time were part of us. Don't tell me there wasn't no faction at the time, because there was still a faction. It was old police jury guys that were still there, and their concept was that these police jurors that were still left, the three of us, were trying to destroy the council form of government. I don't know if we had that much power, but anyhow, that was and we were kept in the dark. That 4 years, we never knew it. Only thing we knew is what they wanted us to know. Basically, that's about what it was. And then I got into the administration with Charlie, and it was a little bit better. Till I messed with him with MCI, and then he wouldn't let me talk to the department heads, talk to him either. No, but I've never, it was a lot better working under Charlie's administration, because you could get information and things of that nature. And I've been there and I've done that, and it's being a council person. It's hard because people out there still will call and ask for something that you can't do. And if they call and they can't get it done, they'll call their police juror, a councilman, and they'll still think it's the police juror, and they don't understand that it's not the way it was. He can't just call somebody and say, tell his ward crew that I need this grass cut, or I need this tree cut, or I need this trash picked up. It just doesn't work like that anymore. So basically, I found it over all the years, and till my last term, and I was still getting a lot of blame for things that I couldn't get done. And it's still happening today. People just don't understand why they can't call their council person and get something done. They can call them, and it's best to call them, because if they call and the administration gets a call from the police, from the council person themselves, my standing order, if a council person calls, see if it's a priority, and if it is, if we can do it, then you go ahead but you still have to put in a work order, just like you always did. And you know the same thing you had to do, Dave, when you was as a police juror. You still had to fill out the forms and get things and put it in necessary order.
Mr. Stovall?
Yes, well, when we initiated this thing, I did have, of course, the perfect form of government presented. I'll readily admit that this form of government is not perfect, but I had the perfect one, and that was, of course, a dictatorship with me in charge. And that was turned down. And so we had to fall back on, and this is our fallback position, is one where we involve elections and politics and differences of opinion. And the most important thing about freedom is that people get to vote, and you got the right to be wrong once in a while. And but I think all in all, the new form of government is probably allowed the parish to move forward better. We have better allocation of resources. We have better accountability of the resources that are spent. We have a better distribution, I think, of resources to repair needs. We have a prioritized system where the street that needs the repair the worst gets it first, not the street that's in the guy's ward gets it first. And so there's been improvements. Should there be some more improvement? Absolutely.
Charles, let me ask you this.
Yes.
Do you believe that there's a possible shift of power into the road department? In other words, the way it used to be on the police jury, if someone had a problem with a hole in the street, they would call Junior Rodriguez up and say, Junior, I got a hole in my street, can you come give me some blacktop or some shells or whatever it is?
But
Now,
can I interrupt you? You
Sure.
talking about when Junior was a police juror, when he had more men in his crew than the Public Works had? Or
but in connection with that,
I people in my ward crew, and they got in all the road district right now.
right, I don't ever have to defend Junior, but as you indicated earlier, he did represent 50% of the physical layout of the parish, and so.
And the majority of my people came out of the federal program.
I know, it's coastal zone management.
All the
right,
coastal
well,
markets.
we'll get into
If it
that.
wasn't, you guys would have never given it to me. Don't worry about
Charles,
it. I know that.
Charles, the thing that concerns me not being involved, so I don't know if it should be a concern or not, is that when someone would call Junior up and say, look, I need you to patch my street, now, as I understand it, Junior does not, well, he's an executive now, but a councilman does not have that opportunity to go out there and send a crew to take care of the street. But if you call up the road department, he's a friend of yours, hasn't the power just shifted from one department to the other? If you know the head of the road department and you say, look, Joe Smith, this is Dave, I want you to come fix my pothole, don't you believe that that priority list that has been set out by the theory in the application of the new form of government is not effective?
Well, to answer your question, yes, we do. Even though we have a priority list, this is something that I think has improved because most of our streets have been repaired, blacktop streets and so forth. But as far as that, if you know the Public Works Director, if you know the Recreation Director, if you know the Fire Chief, your hydrant's going to be checked first, so if you've got a problem. But the directors do have the power, as Junior said, that the police jurors had. But the thing is that I think under my administration and I feel Junior's administration, these department heads, they meet regular together and they go over their problems. And right now, Public Works gets the most money, so that's probably why they're probably the most influential, because they have more money to do things. But
And I think what some of the thinking was in the day of the police jury is that you're taking the power structure out of the hands of the elected official and putting it into the hands of the administrator. And that's the problem that I believe people argued way back when. Is that right, Mr. Stopenow? It wasn't that one of the arguments?
I would disagree with it, because I would say, first of all, Mr. Rodriguez is an elected official, and he has quite a sway over what happens in the road department, and can command respect in that department. So you still have an elected official involved. Now, to talk about special favors, we're humans. If you know somebody, you're going to get a favor. I mean, that's just a human race. That's just all there is to it. The big difference
You say that
is...
when those police jurors, though.
The big difference, though, is that for a road department guy to do a favor now, it's an improper thing, and he could be chided for it. Under the police jury, it was the proper thing to do. So we've taken something that was proper and normal, but not beneficial to the vast majority of the people, and we moved it over to where, in order for that to happen now, something improper has to take place. That doesn't say it doesn't happen. People still steal, even though it's against the law. But just think, if it wasn't against the law to steal, what would be going on? So it's a matter of degrees, and perfection is something that'll never happen. You'll never have, as a judge, when you were trying court, you never had a perfect witness. You had a witness that presented what he saw, and every once in a while, as a judge, you might have been able to see that you have a witness that was presenting something he really didn't see, and experience would teach you that. But at the same time, that doesn't mean the judicial process is a waste, because witnesses may lie. It's improper for them to do it, and a good judge can catch them at it. But if it were proper for them or not illegal, just think of what lying goes on. And well, that's the same thing. Under the police jury system, it was proper for the wards to play favorites. There wasn't anything illegal about it. That was politics. Well, now it's improper. It still goes on, but to a much lesser degree. And a good president, I think, can whip that into shape.
Let me bring up...
I'd like to,
Sure, Henry.
I'd like to answer part of that.
Absolutely.
You're absolutely correct, but it has to be brought into place. And if you think that doesn't happen, and that hasn't happened, and that's not happening now, I'm living proof that it is. Because, once you get through an election and you got people that have, regardless of what it is about the civil service, that supported the other person or persons, still have that ill feeling that you're there and their person didn't make it, or they were going to get a big raise or a job, because you run into that animosity, and I'm still fighting that battle up there to today. And I'll get it straight. Don't get me wrong, I'll get it straight, but it's going to take me a while. And you would think that by now that some of them would learn, that there's a change. You need to adjust to the change. But you are right about one thing, that we've got not only civil service, but we got union in our parish, our employees. And, I mean, you're hit with a double whammy. Not, you know, you got two. And you get these people in place, and they're very hard to touch, some of these people. And you get these people in a position where they're opposed to you and want to be vindictive, and you can send them on there. You can send them on any work order that you want. If they decide to do a good job for this person, a bad job for the other one, it's kind of like you're stuck with some of these people, you know.
Charles, let me
That's
shift.
one of the problems that you got with it. And I haven't even got to the road district yet, but we're renovating everything at the present time, you know, because what we're doing is the sewer and water board. We're redoing the whole structure. We're going to be doing the same thing with the road district like we've done with inside the building.
Let me shift gears for a second, Charles. I want to get into financial responsibility, fiscal responsibility under the old system as opposed to the new system. And I want to bring you back to the early 80s when I was still on the police jury. And I want to remind you of a bond issue that we passed in the early 80s. And I know you know the one I'm talking about. It was a $3,300,000 bond issue. I would like for you to explain to the audience what we did, how it worked, and how it would not work today.
Yeah, well, that's where we were getting into the 11 fiefdoms. That $3.3 million was divided into $330,000 per each ward or each district. And at that time, as I was brought up, the oleanders was that each elected official at that time decided where that money would be spent. Even though the $3.3 million was passed parish-wide, because of the system and because of the administrative and legislative powers of each elected officials, that's the only way it was agreed upon by a majority to be spent. So this is where, getting back to the parish-wide concept as opposed to the individual district concept. And as Junior said, every administration is going to have a different way to lead their administrators. But I do feel that as the, how would you say it, the importance of government, mostly local government in each state, becomes aware to every individual, there are now professional training for individuals to improve their skills, because when we took over as police jurors, we had to become administrators and legislators. Now we have people that are trained professionally to do this, and it makes Mr. Rodriguez's job and my job at past 8 years a lot easier. But Dave, you know, I think one thing that a weakness of this system is that when we were police jurors, we sat in on budget meetings, and we went through every department and line itemed everything and made sure that every department had enough money to run. Now the councilmen, because most of them don't know the everyday operations of it, was an advantage to Mr. Rodriguez and myself as councilmen to be able to have some input during the budget meetings and the budget adoption. So this is one of the weaknesses, but hopefully that'll improve.
But on the other hand, too, David, it has its good points and its bad points. Because, Charlie, and you yourself, when you had public hearings and you had budget hearings and department heads came, they always asked. And if the money wasn't there, you had to tell them no. You know, the way we got it now, the council doesn't have to tell them no.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think I'm going to change that. You know, when there's plenty of money, everybody can say yeah. But when your funds start decreasing, and I believe in the open process, really.
I've been instructed that with the coming attractions that Mr. Rodriguez is speaking of, this would be the perfect time to close this portion of the panel discussion. All right. So with that, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to ask our guests to stay in place just real quick. We'll go right on to the question and answer period. But first, let's have another hand. That's fantastic. And so, but just very quickly, I'd like to thank everybody for coming to this lecture series. As you know, the lectures are the first Monday of each month of the school year. They're free and open to the public. They start at 7 o'clock, and they end right on time at 8, even with historians and politicians involved. We have a little break. And the next one is going to be November 1st. It's the history of cemeteries, of St. Bernard, so it should be a great one. The wine and cheese reception, which is fantastic, starts at 6:30. So we'd like everybody to come to the next one and to bring friends. Thanks a lot. Let's have another hand.